hear ye. Everyone should know by now that the Senate Intelligence Committee has asked the Director of National Intelligence to work with the Department of Defense to provide a public accounting by June 25th on unexplained sightings of advanced aircraft and drones that have been reported by military personnel or captured by radar, satellites, and other surveillance systems. It should be noted that these type of sightings led the former head of a UFO study program in the Pentagon, Luis Elizondo, to say the following on CNN back in 2017.
I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
He has not changed his assessment since then and has gone on the record saying that his colleagues had the same assessment he did. Furthermore, his analysis has only been further corroborated by other current and ex-U.S. government officials. One of the most recent corroborations comes from ex-Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, where he was interviewed by Maria Bartiromo on March 19th, 2021. I will do an analysis of some of the segments therein.
I actually wanted to get this information out and declassified before I left office, but we weren't able to get it down into an unclassified format that we could talk about quickly enough.
This is definitely a good sign. It shows that when Ratcliffe was in office, he was part of an effort to get UFO information declassified, and we can surmise from that momentum was created while he was there. And hopefully whatever momentum he was responsible for will continue with new efforts and maybe some new personnel.
But frankly, there are a lot more sightings than have been made public. Some of those have been declassified.
Ratcliffe is echoing something that Elizondo has stated multiple times. That is that there have been many more encounters / engagements with UAP that have not yet been made public. Well beyond just the USS Nimitz UFO event series from 2004 and the USS Roosevelt encounters, two of them that we know of, in 2015. There is also the USS Kidd UFO event series that we've recently come to learn about and has been making waves within the media. But indeed, reportedly, these encounters are only the tip of the iceberg. And notice that Ratcliffe said some of them have been declassified even though they have not yet been made public. I think we have a lot of new UFO encounters to look forward to learning about in the near future.
Or have been picked up by satellite imagery.
This comment is interesting to say the least. There has been a lot of commentary that no current or ex-government official has ever gone on the record saying that there was UFO data acquired through quote-unquote satellite imagery.
Or traveling at speeds that exceed the sound barrier without a sonic boom.
So right before that clip, he talks about UAP moving in ways that are difficult to explain and in ways that are hard to replicate, that we do not, the American military inventory, have the technological means to replicate. And then, as you saw, he talked about these objects going beyond the sound barrier without leaving a sonic boom in its wake. And considering he was the former Director of National Intelligence, I personally assess that the likelihood is he's not just making this up or engaging in speculation, but instead he has been briefed with data acquired through scientific tools which have observed through their instrumentation objects doing exactly this, breaking the sound barrier and no sonic boom being left in their wake. And so it's pretty clear we are talking about technology, or Ratcliffe is talking about technology that is anything but conventional.
You know, when that information becomes declassified, I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Now, right before that clip, Ratcliffe says that there are instances where they do not have good explanations for some of the things that they've seen. And as you just saw, the intention is to have those instances declassified, and then when they do get declassified, he'll be able to talk more about them. And he is referencing the report that is due on June 25th, 2021. Now, it's great that he said this because it demonstrates that he assesses that these kind of instances of UAP encounters are going to get declassified, and he intends himself to talk more about it once that occurs. And this being on national television only produces more pressure on the Department of Defense to ensure that these kind of instances are declassified.
All over the world. There have been sightings all over the world, and
here Ratcliffe just says that these kind of sightings have happened all over the world. And Elizondo has made this crystal clear multiple times that this is not an American-centric phenomenon. There are UAP sightings, engagements, encounters that are occurring everywhere that cannot be easily explained, in which technology is displaying characteristics not consistent with what is known to exist that stems from human civilization. That interview with former DNI John Ratcliffe and Maria Bartiromo took place on March 19th, 2021, and was indeed a bombshell that prompted even further coverage, justifiably so. Let's dig into some of that further coverage, shall we?
Okay, it's real. Are they from another planet?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. The three options that have been presented, that is our secret technology, but we've done a terrible job at coordinating the testing of this technology for decades with ourselves, which is highly unlikely. The second option is that it's foreign adversarial technology, which, if you were to ask me, would be a huge intelligence failure of this country because we've been technologically leapfrogged. Or the third option is that it's something completely different. If it's not ours and it's not theirs, well, then it's someone or something else.
I can't wait for this report to come out.
Those are the three options that Elizondo has laid out. I will tell you that I do not believe that this technology is ours. I mean, would they create the UAP task force to study our own technology? And this presence has been around for decades and decades and decades. Has such advanced technology been created so long ago? So I'm not bullish by any means on it's our technology. I'm also not bullish by any means that it's foreign technology. The infrastructure that would be necessary to produce this level of technology would be enormous. I do think our intelligence agencies would have picked up on that a long time ago. Now, the third option that Elizondo lays out, that it's not ours, and it's not foreign adversaries, therefore it's something else. And I am well over 50% that is exactly the case, that it is something else, and maybe even well over 70%.
Yeah, Maria, I love this interview because 40 years ago it was just this fringe element that would talk about UFOs, and now it's gone mainstream and we're seeing video, and the Director of National Intelligence has come out and said, listen, we can't identify some of this stuff. So I'm looking forward to the report coming out. I love the transparency around the information that our government has about what they're seeing in our skies. And man, what a shocking development if some of these UFOs are confirmed, that there's other life elsewhere and it's come to Earth. Pretty cool.
That would be a profoundly shocking development, to say the very least. And in that vein, Chris Mellon, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, tweeted out the following today, April 1st, 2021. Although it is likely to be delayed, Dan Dresner is absolutely correct that we need to begin preparing for the potentially far-reaching ramifications of the pending unclassified UAP report. Not everyone is as bullish as I am that the 180-day UFO report is not only going to get released, but is going to be extremely impactful upon human civilization. And I want to share some of those opinions of people that are pessimistic in an attempt to inject at least some balance to my presentation. On March 25th, 2021, journalist Brian Bender published an absolutely wonderful article in Politico titled, "Military and Spy Agencies Accused of Stiff Arming Investigators on UFO Sightings." And while I recommend everyone read this article in its entirety, here is a poignant quote from the article. "Some military and spy agencies are blocking or simply ignoring the effort to catalog what they have on unidentified aerial phenomenon, according to multiple current and former government officials. And as a result, the Biden administration will likely delay a much anticipated public report to Congress." Soon after Bender's article dropped, the editor for The Drive, Tyler Rogoway, and one of the founders of the outlet, The Debrief, had some give and take as a result of that article being published. Macmillan chimes in, "It's the truth nobody wants, but it's truth people need to hear. Good job, Brian Bender. There's no report coming in June, ladies and gentlemen. Frankly, it may never come." Tyler Rogoway responds, "Yes, exactly. I got so much blank for mentioning the reality of this in the past. The idea that some crack super team with huge access was going to change all this was not based on reality. Still, good things can come of this, but the notions of how this has gone have been way off." Macmillan, 100% stuff like you and your guys have reported on the 2019 events, the American Airlines events, etc., has been phenomenal. But if anyone thinks the U.S. government is going to come out and say, "Okay, here's what we got on this," is simply being naive. Rogoway, I mean, they can't. It is impossible to do that in the public realm. We already know that. Beyond that, I think we are looking at a summary of the general underpinnings of the topic as it sits. It will still be up to us to actually bring this stuff to light. Macmillan, 100% again, it represents vulnerabilities to national defense. The DoD isn't going to discuss that. Here's one more segment of give and take with Macmillan and Rogoway. Tyler Rogoway, really getting anything on the record in the public domain is great and exciting for this topic, especially for folks like us. But for the general public and some other folks, this is going to be a new round of conspiracy fodder. All that being said, maybe we will be surprised. We can only hope so, but realistically, and from everything I know about the situation, I just don't see it at this point. I hope I am very wrong. Tim Macmillan. Yet again, 100% with you. I truly want to be wrong. I really, really do. But the DoD can have a crystal clear photo of a triangle or a pristine SAR imagery of a Tic Tac traveling at Mach 20. But unless they have actionable intelligence on what those craft are, who is operating them, and intent, will never ever see that data. That's simply not the way this all works. Macmillan continues, let's be clear. It could 100% be aliens from outer space, interdimensional beings, or the second coming of Christ. It would still be considered foreign technology. That Brian Bender Politico article was not all doom and gloom. However, here are two quotes from that article giving us some justification to anticipate something of great substance that may really help bring us into what I refer to as a new world. The good news, he added, is the leadership on both sides appears to be taking this issue seriously and are acting in good faith. But there's growing pressure from Congress for a more organized effort to compile what the government has learned and reveal how it is trying to solve the mysteries. On March 27th, Tucker Carlson had on Chris Mellon, and he said some pretty fascinating things during that interview, to say the very least. Let's dive in and give an analysis, shall we?
What do you think we're going to learn in this report?
Well, thanks very much, Tucker, and thanks for drawing attention to this issue. I think it could be profound and transformative, as the former DNI, John Ratcliffe, suggested, because in 1970, when Project Blue Book concluded, they concluded and told the American people, we don't see any evidence of technological breakthroughs beyond anything that we can do ourselves. We don't see any evidence of a threat to national security. I don't think they can honestly say either of those things in this case. And as people begin to digest that, and they are going to address this at an unclassified level, so that'll be a public statement, I think that's going to raise a lot of questions and send some shockwaves.
Leslie Kean points out in her wonderful book, UFOs, that with the close of Project Blue Book, a press release was given. And within that press release, it was explained why the Air Force is no longer investigating UFOs. And essentially, that same series of statements has been used for decades and decades to be given to anyone approaching the Air Force and asking what their assessment is of UFOs. And ironically, they call this form letter a fact sheet. If you just rolled your eyes, well, that was probably a good, healthy response. Within this quote-unquote fact sheet are 3 key points that have never changed. These 3 key points have been part and parcel of what the Air Force explains to anyone approaching them about their association with UFOs. Here are those 3 key points. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. There has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. There has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified or extraterrestrial vehicles. Now, that was actually very difficult for me to read because I think it is such an overwhelming, glaring, bold-faced lie. Now, I'm not trying to throw the Air Force under the bus. I think the vast majority of the Air Force have no involvement with the UFO issue whatsoever, but I absolutely believe there are elements within the Air Force that do have involvement with this issue. And when I was reading that passage, which came to mind was the 1964 UFO experience allegedly occurring to police officer Lonnie Zamora in Socorro, New Mexico. He relayed that after his sighting, that the object that had landed in that area was completely investigated. The Air Force was involved, and he says that Air Force officers told him to tamper down on anything he says about it, particularly his statements that he saw beings standing beside the craft. It's one thing to say you saw a craft, right? But it's quite another thing to say you saw little beings next to the craft. And he even stated that these Air Force personnel showed him a booklet with pictures, photographs of, I think, other objects that they're familiar with and said, hey, what you see look like this? In other words, these Air Force personnel that were investigating this experience were treating it as completely real, and we're acquiring data and evidence that it occurred. And indeed, this is only the tip of the iceberg. I think the United States Air Force is chin deep in data of every kind you can think of when it comes to UAP. Sensor data galore. I mean, they are the ones responsible for our airspace, the American continental airspace, and any properties that the American government has. And so, of course, they know about UAP. Of course, they know it's real. They know it's real more than I know it's real. Now, enough about that. This leads me to an amazing quote given by Lou Elizondo in a recent, or relatively recent, Coast to Coast AM appearance. He was asked by George Knapp, like, where's the Air Force in this whole UFO disclosure process? Why are they not talking about this at all? Why are they remaining so silent? Here's what Lou Elizondo had to say about that. Let me give you my personal perspective. I don't typically like to offer my opinion because you know what people say about opinions, and I'm sure mine is probably no different. But I will share with you my thoughts on this, only because I asked the same question when I was in ATIP. Why is there this echo when we inquire about UAPs with the Air Force? And I've come to a personal belief that the Air Force has backed itself into a corner to some degree. The Air Force is expected by our country to be the very best in the sky and to have air dominance and to protect our country from anything that's within 2 inches above the ground up to low Earth orbit and beyond. They own the airspace, and they are supposed to own the airspace. They spent a lot of time on Blue Book, and they said publicly that there's nothing to see here, folks. If it turns out that there really is something to see here, then people are going to start asking the Air Force some very difficult questions. And that is, okay, then first of all, why were you wrong before? And if you weren't wrong, then were you purposely making an excuse? Were you deceiving the American people? Here, Chris Mellon goes into what to expect regarding the content of the impending 180-day UFO report.
Do you think that we'll find the government has physical evidence of these vehicles?
We may. I do want to temper expectations a little bit. The request from the Congress is not to release classified information, but to review all of the classified information, regardless of source, and then render an unclassified judgment based on that review. So it's not going to be a big document dump. It's not going to be revealing necessarily new videos or anything of that nature. But they will be reviewing all of the information if they do this in the manner that it's been requested. And then they're going to have to also have to address who's in charge, how are we going to manage this issue going forward, who do we think is behind this, are there any technological breakthroughs here that we should be concerned about? So there's a lot on the plate, and I think it is going to be a big deal.
It's really interesting that Mellon keeps on the table the possibility that this 180-day UFO report could contain some information regarding material that has been retrieved that is of unknown origin. And he goes into explaining that the report is not going to contain anything classified, at least for the report that's given to the public. There is a classified annex, which will give material to the congressional committees that is not going to be released to the public. On the other hand, if you recall what the former DNI, John Ratcliffe, said when he was interviewed by Maria Bartiromo, he said that some of this stuff is going to become declassified. So anything that was classified and becomes declassified could be in that public report that will be accessible to all of us. And I want to emphasize that while I would love as much information as possible in the public report, let's not lose sight of the fact that they have to give something significant to the congressional committees. And they are not constrained by classification, since those congressional committees have high-level security clearances. So there's not a whole lot of excuse not to give these congressional committees some rather interesting material about what the U.S. government knows about UAP. And so let's look at a hypothetical. Let's say within the public report, there was nothing in there that we didn't know already, and it was akin to a nothing burger. Would that mean that this 180-day report has no impact on the disclosure process and is meaningless? And the answer to that question is an unequivocal, overwhelming no. Two reasons for that. Number one, first of all, the U.S. Congress, at least some members of the U.S. Congress, have already been given classified briefings on UFOs. So there's no way that what they're going to get is going to be a nothing burger. They expect to get more information on top of what they've already been given, which from all accounts has been quite substantial and significant. We've seen how those that have been briefed have been discussing this subject, and we've heard from, for example, Rich Hoffman about the nature of those briefings. In fact, why don't we play that clip in which Rich Hoffman, a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, has discussed the nature of what Congress has seen regarding this classified information. And it's based, as far as I understand, on what Lou Elizondo told Rich Hoffman on what their classified briefings contained.
The bottom line is that there's evidence that's been passed to senators and congressional leaders that clearly shows in classified settings that shows objects that are irrefutable. They're not blurry. They're very distinct, and they are very clearly not ours, and doing maneuvers that you can't do. Much better than these little clips that we've had on the FLIR, the gimbal, and the Go Fast. Okay, so bottom line, they've seen the evidence, and they know that this is something seriously that they have to deal with.
So breaking it down very succinctly, the two reasons why this is going to be a huge score for disclosure and transparency, even if the public report is a nothing burger, is because number one, the United States Congress is getting information they have never gotten before, which completely and utterly changes the landscape. Now they're getting extraordinary classified information on UFOs, something that they have never really been given to this extent before. And number two is it's not like they're going to remain silent about it. That doesn't even make sense. Lou Elizondo has never shared any classified information on UAP, but has he remained silent on UAP? Of course not. He tells you it like it is. He tells you that it's his assessment that UAPs are almost certainly not stemming from our inventory, nor inventory of foreign nations, and that it is an intelligence that is not of human origin. Do you not think that Congress will not start to echo that same contention if they start seeing exactly what Elizondo has seen? I would argue they would. So just because the public report could be a nothing burger is not going to have any impact on whether people who have been briefed within Congress are going to talk about what they've seen in a very careful manner, the same way that Elizondo has. And that will ultimately absolutely change the landscape. So what would I want the public UFO report to contain? Well, I made a very succinct comment on that on Twitter, and I'm going to share it now. If the 180-day UFO report would simply say this, if true, then I'd feel good. According to our sensor data that's been meticulously cross-checked among multiple events, we are under the impression that this technology is unlikely from an adversary and is of unknown origin. In that same spirit, here is what Bryce Zabel assesses the public UAP report should contain. This is an excerpt from his article titled An Open Letter to DNI Avril Haines About the UAP Report. At bare minimum, the public section of your report needs to confirm that some UAP exists and defies easy classification, given that sitting U.S. senators and recent CIA and DNI officials say so. If the reasoned judgment is that these mysterious objects are not made by U.S. military, say so. If the further judgment is that Russia or China doesn't make them either, the report needs to make that clear as well. That leaves open the third choice, that someone else, not any world power, makes them. That would be enough to get the discussion and the investigation going properly. You don't have to say the words alien or extraterrestrial if you do not have proof or that proof is classified. In that case, simply tell us what they are not. Journalists can go to work breaking the rest of the story. Thank you so much for spending 27 minutes with me. I just want you to quickly know that you can support this channel through YouTube membership, Patreon, or even buy some merch. All of those links are down in the description, or you could just watch the remainder of this video all the way through, and I will be absolutely overjoyed. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to focus on the necessity for the US government to eviscerate the status quo that is still sort of permeating regarding our collective perception on UFOs. And I'm also going to focus on the sheer volume and fidelity of the evidence, the forensic evidence that I believe the US government has that proves we are simply not alone in the universe. In a recent episode of the show, The Overview, Gotti Schwartz asked Luis Elizondo the following question. Are these three videos, and he's referring to the UFO gun camera videos that were released by the DoD, the only videos that you know of that the US government has that shows unidentified aerial phenomena? Elizondo responds, no, absolutely not. These are probably some of the least compelling videos. Some cases, we've seen these things 50 feet away from the cockpit. Max Motzkovich recently interviewed Lou Elizondo, and he asked a really compelling question. He opens it up with saying, so we have these pilots, we have these technicians, they are witnessing these objects with their eyes and their ears, but then we have further censored data, not just biological. We have radar collection, we have satellite collection, and we have camera collection. But then he goes on to say, what about signals? In addition to all that sensor collection, do we also have signal collection? And here's what Elizondo had to say in regards to that question.
Great question. Unfortunately, I have to be very careful what I say here. What you're referring to is what we call signatures collection. the collection of data resulting from an object moving through space and time, whether it's electronic signature or it's a physical signature like heat ablation or atmospheric ionization, or acoustic signatures like sonic booms, those are all things that we consider.
Elizondo went on to explain that he cannot specify what sensors may or may not have been used, but the indication from my interpretation is that clearly signals is a part of the equation when measuring UAP and only and leading to a more compelling picture of their reality. Furthermore, PJ Hughes, who was a Navy technician for the E-2 Hawkeye, Eye in the Sky airplane, he's gone on the record in saying ESM signals are a part of the equation. So I think it's a safe bet that the United States fidelity on UAP goes beyond satellite, camera, and radar collection. And that is a huge deal. And then Max asked Elizondo, well, I'm going to throw a word out there. What about gravity? And Elizondo seemed to respond with surprise and maybe even delight, and said that that's definitely relevant, but he couldn't go further into it. So it's possible, from my interpretation, that these UAP may be, because of their propulsion system, may be impacting something with in reference or related to gravity that can be measured by scientific instrumentation. And here's Elizondo on a recent episode of the Sarah Carter Show explaining how far back the collection of sensor data of UAP goes.
The scary thing is we've had this data since going back to the 1950s, but that's another story.
With all these citations, I think I've made a pretty good case that the U.S. government has quite the treasure trove of forensic data, creating a very compelling picture that we probably, at the very minimum, are not alone. And there are two foundational reasons that I'm extremely troubled by the policy within the U.S. government to classify this entire subject. One of those reasons I'll explore a little later into this video, but right now I want to focus on the problem of science. By keeping it all squirreled away within the confines of the U.S. government, there is exponentially less minds tackling this enigma. And even within the U.S. government, there's very few minds tackling this enigma. And this is a really big problem. And so whatever gains we could potentially make by studying what appears to be a species that's more intelligent than us are not being made on the basis that the U.S. government classifies this entire subject. And this is profoundly troubling, and you should be profoundly troubled by it, because this is unnatural to the extreme. Do we do this with any other subject? I mean, it would be akin to knowing that the earth is round, but classifying it and telling everyone that the earth is flat. I mean, that's the extent of this absurdity, and it's mind-blowing to say the least. Now, here's a clip with Eric Weinstein on the Lex Friedman podcast. Actually, two clips. He has a PhD in math. He's certainly one among many that we would want to have more clarity on the nature of our universe. But because of the policy of the American government, he has not had that clarity, and only now is he beginning to tiptoe into that clarity. It's a very interesting series of clips. Let's roll it.
We've had the Pentagon release multiple videos of strange UFOs that undermined a lot of us. I just think it's also really fascinating to talk about the fact that those of us who were trained to call BS on all of this stuff just had the rug pulled out from under us by the Pentagon choosing to do this. Whoever is in charge of lying to the public, they need a cost function that incorporates the damage and trust, because I held this line that this was all garbage and all BS. Now I don't know what to think.
So there's two really interesting points in his statements. The first one is that he said he was trained to call BS on this issue, which I think is enigmatic of the situation, that our institutions teach their students and their followers and their constituents and society at large that UFOs is a bunch of bunk when it clearly is not. And so Eric Weinstein has been a victim of that, very sadly. And the other issue is he talked about a cost, and that by lying to the public, now you American government, the very few people dealing with this issue, because the overwhelming vast majority of the American government knows nothing about UFOs. But whoever is involved with it, I mean, I have no other choice but to say that you have been part of the equation that is leading to a diminishment in trust. Although you have it within your power to fix that, of course. And I think the 180-day UFO report would be a wonderful opportunity to set things straight and regain further trust in you, which I think would be healthy for this country and for the world at large. This beautifully segues into an amazing clip with physicist Kevin Knuth, who is a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. And it's from that channel. Here he talks about the symbiosis of the past 80 years where scientists have been unwilling to study UAP, and the US government has basically been unwilling to talk about it and has classified all of it.
Plus, the fact is that we've been ignorant about this situation for 80 years, and for at least 80 years, since the 1940s, I'm just saying, right? So, yeah. This attitude among scientists that this isn't worth studying, and this attitude among, government leaders that, well, we can't talk about this, we got to keep it classified, has led to this situation where almost 100 years later, we are still almost just as ignorant about the situation as we were then. 100 years and we've barely learned anything. Now, has the government learned, has some aspect or program of the government learned something? We don't know. But as a whole, we've learned nothing. The Navy is like, we're encountering these things and we don't know what to do. Congress, please help. That's 80 years. That could have been solved by putting scientists on the problem in the 1940s. Of course, we were worried about Germany at that time. But, after Germany, we could have done that. We could have looked at this problem.
Knuth then goes on to explain that this could be a very serious situation, that these machines could be hostile. And yet, as a world civilization, we're pretending that it's not real. And in fact, if these machines ever became hostile, then a lot of the problems in our world that we see as so pressing may lose some of their significance in comparison. I don't need to be explicit about those problems. We all know what they are. It's been a wild couple years, and there's also global warming and many other problems that we have to contend with. Now, imagine the foolhardiness of creating an environment through omission and through classification that is conducive to the entire Earth believing that there's nothing to UFOs. Imagine the absolute abject madness of that. I mean, it's incomprehensible, literally incomprehensible. And we don't know anything. We know next to nothing about what these are and what their agenda is and where they originate from. And scientists aren't willing to study it. Governments are classifying it. I mean, this is absolutely pure madness. And if I start to explode right now, it's because of the degree of how mad this is. I got to be honest. I really got to calm down a little bit. So let's move into why we may be justified to be optimistic about the incoming 180-day UFO report. Let's start with Lou Elizondo, where he was interviewed by The Debrief very recently.
I know some people right now in the Twitter sphere are saying, well, the report might be a nothing burger. I don't subscribe to that. I think it's going to be much more significant than just nothing to see here, folks. I think it's too late. I don't think we can put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point.
I think Elizondo has as good a handle on the 180-day report as anyone. So I'm going to take this with more than a grain of salt. And besides, this has been my hypothesis anyways. And here, Nick Pope chimes in on his assessment of the 180-day UAP report. Following former DNI John Ratcliffe's remarks about the upcoming UFO report, Senator Marco Rubio thinks they might miss the deadline. Intel officials may have forewarned him of this, but I'll go out on a limb and predict they come in on time or even early. Now, here's a really interesting statement made by physicist Kevin Knuth. Joe Merger writes, I asked Kevin if I could share this here, and he agreed. He made sure to tell me that this is just a feeling, I have no information. And then he's citing Kevin Knuth with this. I had an enjoyable and interesting phone conversation yesterday, and I was told something very big is coming. I don't know what it is, but I feel it too. Well, it seems to me it's based not just on a feeling, but on a phone call that he received. And here's what the Pentagon's press secretary, John Kirby, had to say when questioned about the 180-day UFO report on March 29th.
Back to the phones. Jeff.
Thank you. There was a media report that the DOD is kind of not taking seriously some legislation to tell Congress all that it knows about unidentified aircraft, and reports that these aircraft have been around ships and aircraft carriers. And I'm wondering, can you respond? Is the Defense Department taking this seriously?
If you're asking if we're taking our requirements seriously to develop this report and to keep Congress informed, of course we are. But I don't have any details on the specifics of the report itself for you today, Jeff.
That question was obviously predicated on Brian Bender's Politico article that I covered earlier in this video. Now, here's a really fascinating statement by James Fox that was made on the show Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Sterrett on March 19th. Christopher Mellon said that there's supposed to be an evaluation, a report that's supposed to be made public about an assessment really as to what's going on. That's due at any moment. And I know that Mr. Mellon is working hard behind the scenes on getting that out. So I'm very, very optimistic, more so than I've ever been, times 100, times 1,000, quite honestly. So I really believe that we are at a tipping point. I don't see it going backwards. I see this going forward. Now, back in November of 2020, James Fox said that something big is coming. He said it was specifically an assessment, and many people thought he was referencing a debrief article that ultimately came out. But Christoph, the person who gave me this intelligence, he doesn't think so. Christoph thinks that he is referencing, and I think he thinks he's referencing an interim report prior to the full 180-day UFO report. And it appears that maybe even Nick Pope is referencing that. And indeed, Lou Elizondo has referenced that interim report. Elizondo didn't say he expects it to come out or anything, but he said that that would be a good way to go about this so that the actual 180-day UFO report could be extended. Now, of course, I don't know what James Fox is referencing, but he said that there is an evaluation, a report of assessing what's really going on that is due at any moment. And the 180-day report is not due at any moment. At best, it's due on June 25th. So clearly, in my perspective, James Fox is referencing something entirely different. My best guess as to what he's referencing is an interim report from the government, which could be interesting to say the least. That segues beautifully into how I'll end this video, which is with a March 21st tweet. Once and if it's ever officially verified through evidence and official channels that we're not alone as there's alien machines in our airspace and seas, it'll become a worldwide imperative to solve mystery of who's controlling these craft. That will be a beautiful time on our planet. Please do not forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.